Hi there guys, spring's well within motion as you can see and hear around me, and it's a great time to be out exploring and enjoying a bit of bushcraft. So I thought I'd do a video covering some of the wild edibles you can find at this time of year. This is quite an interesting edible to find. Hairy bittercress, and it grows on the sides of roads, wastelands, woodland floors, all throughout Europe, and it's quite easy to identify. You'll see at the base some sort of circular leaves there, and on the end of the leaf stem you've got like a main lobe, and that's pretty classic for bittercress. But the further up you go, the leaves become a bit more narrow, and don't let that put off your ID. That's pretty classic again for this particular edible. But it's got quite a peppery taste to it, and it's a nice one to find. So this here is called goosegrass, and you're probably very familiar with it. I used to throw it on my mate's backs when he wasn't looking and let him go home with it all over his jumper. But it's a bit like Velcro, and that's why it sticks so well to sort of corresponding materials. But it's a good edible to eat. I would boil it first because, as I say, it's a bit tough around the mouth because of that texture that it has. But just blanch it a bit or boil it, and you can have like a nice little parcel to just snack on. So again, an edible that's not really going to need too much of an introduction. I'm sure most of you know what this is, but this is dandelion, and you'll find it from March all the way through to October, pretty much inhabiting grassy areas, sides of roads, waste places. You know, we're in a woodland here, and this is an open canopy with lots of grass and floor life on the ground. So yeah, it's obviously growing here. But the entire plant's edible, and the root is as well. But the root itself should really be picked in the autumn, where it's a lot bigger and a lot fatter. And you can bake it and grind it up and make a substitute for coffee. But I don't really think it tastes much like coffee at all. So this is an edible that you'd probably smell before you saw it, and this is often referred to as wild garlic because of that smell. It's actually a type of wild onion, and it's called ramsons, but very popular to cook with nonetheless. But you can eat it just raw, straight off the plant, and the buds too. And it's short-lived compared to most edibles, but worth taking advantage of while it's around. So what we've got here is a little bit of hawthorn. It's a very common bush to find. And early in the year the leaves are actually very tasty straight off the tree when they're young. Like a lot of young leaves, they'll be quite supple and easy to just chew straight away. And as the year goes on, they will firm up a bit. You can still eat them, and it just requires a little bit of steaming by the fire just to soften them up. But later on in the year they'll produce a fruit, a berry, a hawthorn berry. And the whole sort of range of what you can get off the tree tastes quite nutty actually. The leaves, the berries. Reminds me a lot of avocado, but very good bush to find. There are a few types of sorrel in the UK, but this one here is called sheep sorrel. And it grows up to about 30 centimetres high, and it's a single stem plant that likes growing in open pastures. You get a few more broader leaves at the bottom, and then as it goes up to this red kind of flower head, the leaves kind of die off a little bit, but they're still just as tasty and edible. But as it grows to its full height, you'll see in open pastures that there'll be loads of it blanketing everywhere, and you can pick it out quite easily. This is an edible that we don't really need much of an introduction for. This is nettle, and it's pretty overlooked in this country, I think, given its nutritional value, which is very, very high. Contains vitamin A, C, iron, and also about 5% protein, I believe, which makes it quite formidable compared to others. But if you mix it with a variety of other edibles, like sorrel for example, it's one of my favourites anyway, and it makes a really nutritious soup. This is an edible fungus called dryad saddle, or nicknamed pheasant back fungus because of its appearance. You often find it growing on dead stumps of ash or sweet chestnut, in this woodland in particular anyway, But you want to pick the fungus while it's small and young, because the older it gets, the squidgier and more maggot infested it becomes. And then later on in its life, it becomes like cardboard. So one like this, for example, is perfect. You can see the underneath is still quite soft. It's not squidgy. If I take a small piece of this one, you'll see that it's squidgy and it becomes like a sponge. But this one here is still quite firm and young, and that's how you want them. So I'm going to take that one home and have it for my lunch. I'll take this one as well. He's not going to last long that low down. What we've got here is a bit of blackberry, and later on in the year it will produce berries that we can eat, which are actually a very formidable edible. They're very, very high in fibre, and yeah, shouldn't be overlooked really. But at this time of year it really just has its leaves to offer. If you like Earl Grey or sort of aromatic teas, then you can pop some of these leaves into some hot water and actually make quite a nice tea. Although it's not recommended if you're pregnant, because it does have some medicinal properties to it as well. So it's best to have a look before you do that. What we've got here is a bit of wood sorrel, and as you can see it's got quite a different appearance to the other sorrel we found in the pasture. It almost looks a bit like a clover, but with a slightly more heart-shaped leaf. And funnily enough, these leaves actually close up a bit like this one here in strong sunlight. It contains a mild acid, which gives it its kick, and it tastes a bit like apple schnapps. But it's a really nice edible to find, and you can just chuck it straight on anything or eat it as it is. Despite how common this edible is, it doesn't diminish its value. Historically, and even today actually, it's been used as a medicinal applicant for a whole range of major and minor illnesses. And it's definitely worth looking into plantain if you're not familiar with it. But as an edible, you can eat it, but best eat the younger leaves. They're much more supple, as is with most edibles. So the thicker ones tend to be a little bit chewy, and it can often act as a diuretic. What we've got here is an edible called garlic mustard, often nicknamed Jack by the hedge. But garlic mustard obviously relates to its taste. Again, it's one of those edibles that has quite a strong garlicky kind of oniony taste to it. But it's a single stemmed plant that obviously grows in clusters. You find it by roadsides, waste areas, woodlands, lots of them growing together. And it's important to note that you should only really take 1 or 2 leaves from each stem, and because you find it in clusters, it gives you the ability to pick large numbers of it without damaging one plant. But it flowers from April through to June, and it has like seed pods at the top which can be eaten later in the years. But it should make it quite easy to identify and help it stand out if you're browsing into the woodland. What we've got here is a bit of cuckoo flower. It's quite a nice edible to find actually, although it doesn't really provide you with a huge meal. But it flowers from April to June, and the leaves at the base of the plant can bear quite a resemblance to bittercress, but the further up they go, they become very, very narrow, a bit like that. But you can pick the petals off and eat them, and the leaves are actually best at later on in the year, as the flavours die down a little bit. So this is again quite a common one that I'm sure lots of you have used on your skin when you've been hit by a stinging nettle over the years. But this is curled dock, and unlike broadleaf dock, it grows just over 1 metre high, and it usually has quite a large red sort of fruiting head at the top that you can see quite clearly, and the stalk can generally be quite red as well. But the leaves are nice when young, and they can be eaten straight off the plant. sure some of you recognise this one. This is burdock, and it's quite a popular one when edibles are concerned, but a lot of people will dig up the root and chop it up, clean it and fry it, a bit like fried potato, and it is very nice like that, very starchy, a good substantial meal for when you're outdoors, which is something that can be a rarity anyway. But the leaves can be handy too. They're very good for cooking in, or they work well for a surface area to work on. If you've decimated the plant by digging up the root, why not use the rest of it? What we've got here is marsh thistle, and this is probably my favourite out of the thistles. It's quite easy to identify because it has sort of a dull purple on the outskirts of the leaves, so on the edges and growing up the stem, and the whole thing is very, very hairy. Leaves, stem, with spikes growing up the stem as well, which you don't often find too obviously on other thistles. They're very pronounced on the marsh thistle. But it likes growing on sort of very damp soils, so you know, this woodland here holds moisture very well on the ground, and this thistle grows in abundance everywhere, so it's a great snack to have on the go. But what I like to do is just skin the whole thing and just have the stem pretty much like celery and just snack on it as you go. You'll often see this plant decorating the forest floor. It's yellow archangel, and you'll find it flowering between April and June. But treat it like you do all the dead nettles. Just eat the young shoots, young leaves, and yeah, it's quite a nutritious plant. What we've got here is an example of a thistle, and there are a variety of thistles that you can find in the UK. This one here is a creeping thistle, and I can just tell this by the leaf and the stalk, but the leaves, although prickly, are much softer to touch than some of its counterparts. But the stem is the main thing you want to eat on this, even though the leaves are edible. It's not particularly a snack you'd want to eat unless you had to. But the stalk itself can be chopped and skinned, and or skinned and chopped, are probably the best way around, and then fried, and provided you fry it quite well, it can soften it up a bit and make it quite a tasty snack. So this is a very, very common one, and it's called primrose. And both the leaves and the flowers are edible. A lot of people will just eat the leaves and flowers. The young flowers are very good for making tea. But although it's classified as an edible, certain microspecies will cause unusual allergic reactions. So it's best to just have a look at it or just eat it in small quantities. But it's good to remember to always only take a few leaves from each plant, just not to damage the plant. But you will find it all over the place in open canopy. So it is a very, very common one. So it won't just be the bluebells decorating the forest floor with a shade of purple, but this little edible as well. I mean, this is really classified as a medicinal applicant. It's a mild sedative as well as a mild antiseptic, and it's been used throughout history to treat so many major and minor illnesses. It's actually quite incredible, really. You know, the people have got on board and started producing sort of natural topical remedies that they can say will cure anything, and they'll sell you them over the internet, and it'll all be made by this one, and it's a bugle weed. But like most edibles, you can eat the flowers, you can eat the young leaves, the young shoots. So yeah, best eaten young, but quite an interesting one to learn about. This particular plant here is a member of the carrot and parsley family, and it has a lot of brothers and sisters that look almost exactly the same, with just very subtle differences. And if you're going to approach this edible, approach it with caution. Some will kill you, some will poison you, some will taste good and you'll eat them and you'll be fine. But there are very subtle differences, as I say, between all the different plants that look alike in the same family. Some will produce, you know, like wild carrot, for example, a nice root that will smell just like carrot, and it is delicious and you can eat it. And you can identify it by an unusual purple flower in the centre of the umbrella canopy at the top. But others will have spotted stems and slightly more sporadic leaves, slight thorns under the petals at the top. And a lot of them, you know, will look very similar, as I say. So I'm not going to cover these in too much detail. mainly because I don't eat them personally, and they're dangerous. There's too much margin for error if you don't know what you're looking for. What we've got here is common hogweed, and as you can see it's almost like an oversized version of cow parsley. Now cow parsley is the plant I spoke about earlier that I said to be wary of, the carrot and parsley family, with all the brothers and sisters that look very, very similar, some poisonous, some not. But the thing about this one is it's quite easy to identify because of its oversized appearance. You've got a main stem here with all these large lobes sprouting off, and it can be quite easy to spot just on the hedgerows if you're browsing along. But this one's quite young, and the young leaves can be eaten. The stem can be skinned and boiled like a vegetable, and it is quite a substantial vegetable, very nutritious. But the thing I like about them is this flower bud here, and this one's unopened, and that's what you want. You want to pick that off, lightly steam it, and it's almost like broccoli, and it's a good vegetable to find, really. But do be careful of giant hogweed. That's a slightly different variation of hogweed, and one to be wary of, so do have a look into it before you go out and pick it. Again, another common one I'm sure plenty of you have seen around. This is white dead nettle, and a member of the dead nettle family, probably the most common one you'll see. I used to pick the flowers off these and chase my mates around thinking they were, well, making them think they were real nettles that were going to sting them. But these don't sting you, much like all the dead nettles you'll find. But yeah, treat like any nettle really. Eat the young shoots, young leaves. You can eat the flowers as well, and it's pretty abundant. You'll find it everywhere. So what we've got here is a spear thistle, one of the ugly ones of the thistle family. And unlike creeping thistle and marsh thistle, the leaves are a lot tougher and the spikes are a lot spikier. So if you move in to give it a grab, you'll find that it'll get you pretty much straight away. But you can pretty much distinguish it by it being a lot deeper in colour, and the lobes are far more defined on the leaf. So if I try and take a leaf off here, without, well, I'm getting spiked big time, but you'll see there that that's pretty distinct. It's not, you know, the other thistles tend to be quite flat, whereas this one has a twist up the main sort of spine of the leaf there, and the spikes are pretty defined. So the spear thistle is quite easy to identify, but with the spear thistle, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the root, and you can eat the stem, but my preference is really just to eat the stem. I find if you chop it up and you fry it or boil it, it's quite a nice vegetable to have, and the root as well actually. So I hope that video's been of some use to you guys, or those of you who are interested in wild edibles. There's still an enormous amount of edibles I haven't covered really. Those are just kind of the more common ones, the ones you find in large quantities everywhere. I mean, there is hazel here as well, plenty of hazel in this woodland, although it doesn't have much to offer you now. You know, later on, if you can beat the squirrels, some of the bigger bushes will provide you with nuts, and they are quite nutritious. But there's beech as well. There's no beech in this woodland, but beech leaves in the early spring are delicious, straight off the tree or on salad. Got a bit of a bite to them towards the end of you chewing them, so they are very refreshing. But obviously beech produces a nut as well, every sort of 3 to 4 years. There's sweet chestnut, there's bilberry, rosehip, comfrey, mallow. There's loads I haven't covered actually in the video, but unfortunately got a tick on me there. There's loads of those things around. Got to be careful really with deer ticks, you get Lyme's disease. But they're actually pretty resilient. I just crushed that one. But anyway, yeah, there are loads of edibles I haven't covered, and unfortunately that's because I just haven't been able to find them in this environment. I'm towards the edge of the woodland now, and when you're on the edge of the woodland you tend to get, you know, quite a lot more than you do sort of in the depths and darkest areas of the woods. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I do make guides, and I do sell these guides. I'll put a link below if any of you are interested. I know some of you have already bought it, and this really does cover pretty much everything we've been over today. I mean, they cost about £1.50 if you're interested, and I usually put the money towards making other guides, which I'm currently making a few others at the moment. But yeah, please do message me if you have any questions, and yeah, thank you for watching.